Hello and welcome to Advertising Not a Funny Business. Today's episode is all about insights. What are insights? What are not insights? How to write an insight and how to find an insight. Also, I'll be using the word insight about 120 times during the episode, so brace yourself. In an inciting role, you have to don many hats. You are a detective, lawyer, and songwriter all in one. I will elaborate on this multi-archetype personality when I show you how to convert not insights into insights. But first, let's start by understanding what an insight is in the context of brand building and advertising. Insight is arguably the most debatable topic in advertising. We don't discuss if something is a good insight or a bad insight. Most often we are debating if it is worthy of being crowned as an insight. Today I'll tell you about 6 imposters that pretend to look like insights but are not valued enough. So first, let's define what an insight is so that you can understand what is missing in a non-insight. In defining what a strategy is, Julian Cole said that it is made of 3 parts: goal, problem, and solution. An insight sits in between the problem and the solution. Insight helps you reframe the problem or gives you a surprising new solution. Rory Sutherland defines insights as seeing something which is only obvious after you've seen it. Tom Roach defines insights as a revelatory truth, something you've never heard before but know instinctively to be true. Erwin Schrödinger said that the task is not so much to see what no one has yet seen, but to think what nobody has yet thought about that which everybody sees. Talking about insights, Martin Weigel said that you cannot mine for insights. They're not waiting to be uncovered. They are the product of thought and analysis. Jeremy Bullmore famously said, "Why is a good insight like a refrigerator? Because the moment you look into it, a light comes on." Jeremy Bullmore, in his book Apple Insights and Mad Inventors, said that there are 2 kinds of insights: high potency insights and low potency insights. And he shared an example to explain this. Product satisfaction arises less from inherent construction and performance than from consumers' internalized perceptions of personal utility. This is a low potency insight. A high potency version of this insight would be: people don't want quarter-inch drills, they want quarter-inch holes. Both the insights contain the same truth. And while the low-potency version of the insight may be more accurate, it completely smothers inspiration. It fails to give you that heart-lifting revelation-wali feeling, also called the aha feeling. So essentially what Jeremy Bullmore is trying to say is that how you articulate the insight is as important, perhaps more important, than the insight itself, because it is the articulation of the insight that creates the aha feeling. So if I have to squeeze the essence of what all these experts are trying to say about insights, there seems to be 3 crucial parts to an insight. Number 1, it has to be a revelation of something seemingly obvious. By obvious, I don't mean it has to be obvious like a cliche, but obvious in a way that it makes sense to you intuitively. You don't have to think hard to understand it. An insight should not be hardworking. That instinctual nod of head is what makes the aha moment happen, because it is so obvious. It was right in front of your eyes. You just didn't see it like that before. That is what brings the wow effect. Number 2, you need to articulate your insight in an inspiring way, so that it sounds new and sparks something in your head. That's the second thing to bring the wow effect. And the third, the most important part, is that it should solve the business problem and the human problem you have in front of you. That's the third thing that will really bring the wow effect, because that's how you will connect all the dots to your brand and lead the insight to the creative solution. So the 3 things: 1 is revelation of obvious, 2nd is inspiring articulation, and 3rd is solving the business problem. Now, I have one definition of insights that I learned from my seniors at work, and it is more practical. An insight is a surprising truth about your consumer in the context of your category that only your brand can address. I know this sounds a little instructive and ironically not inspiring at all, but there are two important things to note here. One is that every time you come up with an insight, you have to ask yourself, or your seniors will ask you, how is this insight unique? And can our competition say the same thing? It needs to be something that only your brand can address. The second interesting thing to note here is that an insight needs to unlock the way people have always thought about the product or the category. The insight needs to be rooted in the context of the category. Now, this must be hygiene. I'm guessing that is why no other definition captured it, but I think it is crucial. If you have a fascinating insight about your audience, but it doesn't reveal anything about the role of the product in any way, you are going to have a tough time using that insight to sell your product. That is what they mean when they say we need actionable insights. The insights should lead you to act on your brand, and for that you need to connect the dots in a way that makes your product and your brand relevant to the target audience. Okay, I'll share some examples now and hopefully this will make more sense. So let's play a little game here. I'll read out 5 sentences and you have to guess which ones are insights and which ones are not, and then we'll talk about them. Here it goes. Stressed, spelled backwards, is desserts. Number 2. Working women have a tricky time balancing home life and work life. Millennials and Gen Z are impatient. A motorcycle gives you wings of freedom. Single people on Valentine's Day feel awkward around couples. Now pause the podcast here, take a moment and think about these 5 sentences. Consider all that I've said about what an insight is and what it should include. And tell me, as in you can't tell me, but tell yourself, which ones you think are insights and why. Done? Okay. Surprise, surprise, none of those are insights. That was a googly for you. So let's go through them one by one and I'll tell you why they are not insights. Single people on Valentine's Day feel awkward around couples is not an insight. It is an observation. It is a reflection of human behavior, what people do, how things happen, all on the surface level. And I'm not saying observations are useless. They are a good starting point to arrive at insights, but we need to dig deeper, and I'll show you a technique for this at the end of this episode. One example of how this particular observation was turned into an insight. Look at the Valentine's Day campaign done by 5-Star this year. It was all about helping single people escape the Valentine's Day drama and celebrate doing nothing instead. Do nothing, by the way, is the current brand idea / tagline of 5-Star. And you can see how the observation turned into something that could be addressed by the brand 5-Star and no other brand. A Dairy Milk or a Munch cannot have this conversation. The insight here was how single people can actually celebrate doing nothing on a day that means nothing to them. Next one. Millennials and Gen Z are impatient is not an insight. It is truism. It is true, everybody agrees, it is obvious, but it is still broad strokes. It lacks an angle. Every insight needs to have a unique angle. What happens when they are impatient? Why does it matter to them? We need to find an answer to all these questions in order to stumble upon an insight. I'll give you some bad examples to explain what I mean. How there can be several angles or insights around impatience depending on the product category you're working on. For instance, when you're impatient, you check your watch again and again. Time seems to crawl, every minute feels too long, and yet you don't enjoy those moments at all. So maybe a watch brand like a Titan could do a campaign on the need to slow down, to enjoy moments in waiting, and a reminder to savor the moments of impatience, like just before the exam, or before an interview, or before hearing the results of something you'd been waiting for. That is an angle. Or another example, when you're impatient, you're eager about what's going to happen next. There's a lot of anticipation about the future. So maybe a technology brand could say something like, we will give you today what tomorrow is made of. The latest everything. So you see how one piece of truth about the target audience can be sliced in different ways that are unique to the brand and the category you're working on. If you remember, there was this Airtel broadband ad some 10 years ago I remember I was in college at the time and I loved that ad. Their campaign line was impatience is the new life. The brand message was about fast internet speed, and the impatience displayed there was very different from the angles I spoke about just now. There was a very distinctive rebellion, maybe more like an irreverence for all things slow. Go back and watch that ad and you'll see how the young people in the ad were frustrated by slowing down, like slow internet was becoming an obstacle in their fast pursuit of goals and things to do. And it perfectly connected the dots with the product delivery of fast internet speed, 16 Mbps at that time. Watch that ad and tell me if you see what I see. A motorcycle gives you wings of freedom is again not an insight. It is a research finding. It could be revelatory, an interesting emotional truth about the consumer, but there is no creative spin in it. That's a very important aspect of an insight, and it took me a while to get this. In advertising, you think creativity is the responsibility of the creative department, but that's not true. Inciting needs a lot of creativity. The way you articulate the insight makes all the difference. If you remember the iconic Avenger ad where he's riding on the bike on an empty road and he says he forgives his girlfriend, forgives his teacher, his father. You remember that ad? So there you'll see that essentially it is about freedom, but the freedom here is about letting go, leaving behind all the chaos, rising above everybody else, almost like you're God. Freedom by itself is an empty, vague word. But as soon as you articulate the insight, something like letting go of the grudges you hold, it becomes a lot more evocative. Working women have a tricky time balancing home life and work life. Now, this may have been an insight 20 years ago, but not anymore. Today, this would be called a cliche, not an insight. And that is the truth about insights, that insights are temporary. What was considered an insight a few years ago may not be relevant today. Like this statement we have in front of us. Women have come a long way from this. It is no longer just about the problem of multitasking. Also, the way she wants to be seen or she wants to be represented is not this imagery of hard-working bichari woman, That is why whenever you're thinking of an insight, think about what is culturally relevant and what will make sense today. For example, look at how Ariel keeps refreshing the Share the Load campaign. It is not just about division of chores anymore. It highlights different aspects of the problem. If you've seen their latest ad, it came out a few weeks ago, they talk about being seen as equals. The insight there was that men share the load equally with other men, but not with their wives. That's a new conversation. It is not the same, I'm doing so much work all the time narrative, You see the difference? Next statement is, stressed spelled backwards is desserts. Now, in the list of all the sentences I shared with you, this was perhaps the only one which had a revelation of sorts, and it would have felt surprising and inspiring if you were noticing it for the first time. But it is the farthest one from being an insight. It is just a fun fact. Stressed is a loaded term, right? It could mean so much. Without an interpretation of what kind of stress we are talking about, this line is not useful at all. It is too broad and generic. Insights need more nuance. As an example of this, one Cadbury's ad comes to my mind. This is also one of my favorite ads. Not sure if you've seen it. I'm talking about the ad where you see a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law sharing a bite of Cadbury's and then breaking into a Bollywood dance on the streets. And it ends with the line, "Badhti dosti ke naam." This ad was completely different from all other Cadbury's ads we've seen, and I don't know what was the thinking behind doing this. But now when I see this ad from the lens of this fun fact and try to find the insight, it's a bit of a force fit, I admit, but let me try. So the ad here shows how the tension between a saas and a bahu gets diffused when they share a chocolate together. And if the brand decided to stay with this insight, they could have done several ads around it with boss and subordinate, landlord and tenant, showing how relationships that are fragile and tense can turn into something fun when you share a Cadbury's chocolate. Now you see how the same fun fact becomes slightly deeper with this insight and opens up the possibility to make tons of stories around it. So we have discussed 5 imposters of insights: observation, truism, research finding, cliche, and fun facts. Now, I'm not at all saying that observation or truths or research findings are useless. They are, in fact, great starting points, but we need to reflect on them deeply to turn them into insights. And I'll show you how, the technique I was talking about before. But before jumping into that, I want to say just a few more things about insights. You know what I said about cliches before? What was an insight 20 years ago would be a cliche today. Insights are temporary, but there are some deep insights, some universal human insights that can be used again and again and across categories. I've talked about this in one of my previous episodes actually, but all I want to say is that when insights are deep, you can spin many different stories in refreshing ways. And that's not plagiarism. That's in fact a marker of a good insight. Does it lead to only one kind of stories? Or can it be interpreted in many different ways? And that is why sometimes insights could be category agnostic. So a health drink ad and a car ad can have the same insight but very different storytelling. You can listen to that episode if you want some examples. It's called Have All Stories Been Told Already? Now let's talk about how to find an insight. Remember the multi-archetype personality I mentioned before? You have to be a detective, lawyer, songwriter, all in one. Yeah, so let's talk about that. The first step to find an insight is to observe. And that is where your detective personality will come into play. You can't Google search your way into an insight. You can't type a query like, great insights on young people eating chips in India. But you can do a hashtag search of hashtag snacking, hashtag chips, hashtag chip and dip, and look at all the conversations people are having about chips. Or you can actually talk to someone in your target audience and ask them some real life questions like, what are those moments when you reach out for chips? How do you feel after consuming it? What role chips play in that moment and in your life in general? Or if you're working on a motorcycle brand, for example, you can look at songs that people listen to while riding a bike. Songs about the highway, road trip playlist, lots of insights hidden in songs usually. So there'll be multiple disparate data and information spread all around, and you have to act like a detective to find an insight by digging deeper. So there's a certain technique we use sometimes to arrive at a deeper insight. It's called the 5 whys, WHY. So you have a great observation and interesting truth in front of you. Now think about why that is happening and go 5 layers down, asking why 5 times consecutively. Remember that these why questions you ask is for your own reflection and analysis. If you directly ask this to your audience, why do you do this, or why do you feel like this, they will give you very rationalized answers and it may not be very helpful. The rule of thumb in research is that you never ask the why question directly. You try to figure it out through the other indirect questions. I could give you examples, but that would be another episode. I think I should get that written on a t-shirt. That would be another episode. Anyway, so this why exercise is for your own analysis. That is what I was saying. Okay, now the fun part. I'll take you through an example from my own experience. I was working on a project for e-waste management. E-waste as in electronic waste. Old electronic gadgets like phone, laptops, etc. that have stopped working and become a waste that needs to be disposed. Now the problem that we were dealing with was lack of awareness and lack of involvement. People did not care about e-waste lying around in their home. Sometimes it stayed dumped in some corner of the house, or worst case scenario, they would give it to the usual waste pickers along with their daily household waste. Both these behaviors are detrimental to the planet because the e-waste is not getting recycled responsibly. You need to give it to the right people who would dispose it for you. So with this background, we needed to develop a campaign that would create awareness about the e-waste issue and also persuade people to hand over their e-waste towards proper disposal system. So with this problem in front of us, I started the 5 why analysis and I'll discuss that with you. Problem statement: people don't care about disposing their e-waste responsibly. The first why. Why do people not care about disposing their e-waste responsibly? Answer: because they stop caring about their electronic devices as soon as they stop working. Why do they stop caring? Because they feel disconnected. Why do they feel disconnected? Because they feel absolved of their relationship with the device. Why do they feel absolved? Because now they are excited about their new device to take place of the old device. Why do they feel excited about the new device? Because they have moved on. You see how it became more evocative and we reached a fertile ground that can be used for communication. The simple insight that came about from this exercise was your ex relationship deserves a closure just like your e-waste. It gave us a new way of looking at the call to action. The call to action was not just go dispose your e-waste responsibly, it was also about giving a closure to your old relationship. And it was quite relevant to the TG we were talking to. Young people who are constantly buying new gadgets, moving on from one to the other, upgrading their devices every other year. Now, I have a disclaimer here. The way I did the 5Y exercise was how I interpreted it. Anybody else doing the same exercise could have taken it to a completely different direction. That's the lawyer character at play. While you act like a detective, trying to connect the dots, at the same time you have to behave like a lawyer to build an argument and take the story in a direction that would be most useful for the campaign. So that when you reach the denouement, all different parts of the story come together and gets everybody convinced on the next steps. For example, the output of this brief was a campaign called Happy Breakups, with the thought that when there is a closure, the breakup leaves both parties feeling more satisfied and perhaps happy. The two words, happy and breakups, are counterintuitive, so it made for a really fun campaign. Lots of fun work using the breakup metaphor and talking about giving your ex a closure. Before you ask, this campaign never saw the light of the day, but that's the story for another episode. Moving on to the third character of your multi-archetype personality, the songwriter. You know how there have been millions of songs written about love, for instance, yet the good songwriters always find a way to make it feel new and special. Now, I'm sure you wouldn't have noticed, but all the examples that I've shared so far, the ones where I explained how to convert a non-insight into an insight, none of them were actually articulated like an insight should be. I took a shortcut and just explained what the insight probably was. That is because crafting an insight is a lot of hard work. It is a craft. It takes time and creativity. That's too much work for this episode. You remember the insight definitions I mentioned earlier, the definitions given by the experts? They all were well-crafted sentences that gave you an aha feeling when you heard them. That's the craft I'm talking about. Before I wrap up this episode, I have a quick cheat sheet for you. Like we discussed before, every insight starts with an observation. So here's a list of places to go looking for things to observe. We call it the 5 C's: company, consumer, culture, category, and competition. These 5 C's actually require a detailed discussion, so maybe I could do it for another episode. But for now, let me wrap this up with a quick recap of how to find an insight in terms of chronology. Step 1, define the goal and the problem. Then start your investigation with the 5 C's. That's where you'll find a bunch of observation to kickstart your brief. After that, for every observation you have under the 5 C's, do the 5Y exercise to arrive at a deep insight. And once you have 5 such insights under the 5 C's, take a step back and see what story is emerging. That story is your strategy. Sometimes intersections of 2 C's like consumer insight and culture insight could reveal an interesting idea, or company insight and consumer insight could spark a creative route. You have to immerse yourself in all these 5 C's to think of a creative way to solve the problem. Now, even when I was saying all this, it sounded too complicated and laborious. It is laborious for sure, especially the 5C exercise when you are investigating the landscape. But after that, it is really all about your intuition and imagination as you play around with all the information and insights you have gathered. With time, the connections would happen automatically in your head, and then you only present the relevant insights, building a step-by-step logic to arrive at what made sense to you intuitively. I realized while working on this episode that explaining the inciting process is quite difficult. You won't fully understand it until you actually start doing it. But I hope this episode helps you get started and you have a great time donning multiple hats. That's it for today. If you want to hear more from me, find me on Instagram. Hey, thank you for listening. This is the 10th episode of Advertising Not a Funny Business. I started this podcast in 2020 and we are entering the 3rd year now. And I'm very happy to report that it continues to be fun for me talking to you guys through this medium. It's been a great ride so far, and thank you so much for listening in. And special thanks to those of you who reach out to me on Instagram and LinkedIn. It makes me so happy to hear from you. My Instagram handle is advertising not a funny business. On LinkedIn, you can find me as Snigdha Bose. And you can send me emails at advertisingnotafunnybusiness@gmail.com. See you in the next episode. Ta-da!
Hey Snigdha, hi, this is Latika here. I'm a qual researcher. I heard your piece on retelling stories based on premise and insight. Great overview, great perspective, especially the cultural nuances bit that interests me as a qual researcher. Would surely wear the cultural lens and share some snippets. And look forward to hearing more of your podcast. Great going. Thanks.
I enjoyed the brand purpose, and the purpose of my enjoyment was because it made me feel nice, and the ending was great. The lover analogy. Thank you for the podcast. Mm, I'm learning a lot, and as a marketing enthusiast, it's very enjoyable to listen. And yeah, that would be all. Cheers. Thank you, Snigdha.
Hey Snigdha, I just finished listening to the podcast. It was amazing. And I think, you've just nailed it, from start to finish and all the examples you gave. And it was just superb. I think, it also proved amply that you've done a ton of homework to come up with this episode. So kudos to you. Look forward to many, many more and many more insights. I've shared the link with some of my friends and cousin sisters who I know. Also, we all, I think, women struggle with exactly the things that you've spoken about, what's, beauty to us and, what's acceptable to people around us and what the media sells us or what ads sell us and stuff like that. So amazing, superb, good job. Love you lots.